Good morning, Danny. How are you in Belgium?
Good, good, very good. Thank you. How are you?
Okay, so thanks for attending this conference that we have been gently invited by CRA. I acknowledge CRA for inviting us to join our presentations. We have selected emerging diseases, animal emerging diseases, particularly for the importance of this subject in the last 10 years and for the future of the animal health, at least from our point of view. What do you think about as an European point of view, Danny?
Yeah, well, emerging diseases, I would say, is not only a South American problem. I think it's, at the moment, it's a real global problem. But it's also very important for Europe. So for Europe, let's say viruses, bacteria have no borders. So we are exposed to emerging diseases and have to prepare as well. And that has been,
so you know, the recent introduction of African swine fever in Dominican Republic, plus the danger of the foot and mouth disease worldwide, expanding and not being able to control these diseases, you know, has alerted us, and that's why we have suggested CRA to introduce this subject or this presentation that we will have. So I appreciate your collaboration, and I thank you very much for your presentation. We to the people that are looking at our presentations, we have coordinated the way in which we will present the subject. So many questions that perhaps are raised in my presentation or in your presentation will be, you know, answered from the other presentation. So if you have something else to say, Danny, that's the time. And then if not, we will start.
Okay, well, I think we can start. I think, well, the topics African swine fever and foot-and-mouth disease are also very relevant to Europe. African swine fever is at our eastern border, so to speak. And with foot-and-mouth disease, we had not that long ago, we had some serious incursions. So the topic is definitely very relevant. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny. So we'll start. El doctor Goovaerts tiene mucha experiencia, es médico veterinario, graduado en Bélgica, tiene mucha experiencia de campo en la práctica veterinaria, tan bien como en la academia, en la universidad y en la industria farmacéutica. Trabajó más de 23 años como director de investigaciones en el Merck Dome de la Unión Europea y en Estados Unidos, desarrollando vacunas contra agentes virales, bacterianos y parasíticos que afectan a los bovinos, a los suinos, a las aves, a los equinos y también la acuacultura. Actualmente es el director ejecutivo global responsable para el desarrollo de vacunas contra enfermedades emergentes y notificables. Es un experto reconocido en el desarrollo de vacunas contra enfermedades transfronterizas, como es la fiebre aftosa, como la influenza aviar, la fiebre porcina clásica, la brucelosis, la lengua azul, la enfermedad del Valle del Rift, la rabia y otras. Actualmente está trabajando también como consultor de BMGF, del Wellcome Trust y de organismos internacionales como la FAO, la OIE y otros gobiernos, además de asesorar a compañías farmacéuticas y otras empresas consultoras. Tuvimos oportunidad desde hace muchos años de conocerlo al doctor Goovaerts y compartir con él muchas reuniones. Es realmente un experto internacional en este tema. Por lo tanto, creo que nos va a dar una magnífica aproximación y profundización en el tema. Dani, vamos a tu presentación y le esperamos ansiosamente. Gracias.
So thank you very much, Alejandro, for the very nice introduction. When Alejandro asked me to give a presentation on emerging diseases, I accepted quite fast because I think for a number of reasons. Because first of all, emerging diseases is not only a very interesting topic, which affects us all. But it's also a very, with all the events that recently happened and also in the past decades, it is a very hot topic actually. And so I started with the title Emerging Diseases, but when I was thinking about it, I was actually thinking I might have to change it a bit more, if you see with the recent events, in the emergency of emerging diseases. So I would like to start my presentation with this slide, because I think it's a very old slide. It's from 1889, but it's a slide about an outbreak of the cattle plague, or also called rinderpest, in the Northern Cape in South Africa. And it's actually giving us a lot of information. It first definitely shows you how devastating the disease can be, but it also tells you something about emerging diseases. Cattle plague until 1880 was exotic to Africa. It didn't exist. It was endemic in India. And in 1882, the Italian army, who was fighting a war in Somalia and in Kenya, imported some Indian cattle into Africa to feed the soldiers. And that is the start of the epidemic. And then it gradually, cattle plague or rinderpest moved south into the whole of Africa. And then they tried to stop it with fences and all kind of biosecurity measures. But a couple of years later, it reached Namibia and it reached South Africa. And the result was that it wiped out, in a couple of months, it wiped out 80 to 90% of the whole cattle population of Southern Africa. Millions and millions of cattle, including a lot of wildlife, like deer and antelopes, which were all killed by rinderpest. It also resulted in starvation of something like 2 to 2.5 million people. So it was a very, very important disease. Nevertheless, in the meantime, with vaccination, that disease is being controlled, although it is very ancient as well. It is described in the Hebrew Bible as one of the 7 plagues of Egypt. A disease in cattle is described, which very likely was based on rinderpest outbreaks. Now, in the meantime, with vaccination, some live, very efficacious vaccines which have been developed, rinderpest has been eradicated from the world. In 2010, the FAO declared the world free of rinderpest. It's the second viral disease which is eradicated from the world after smallpox in humans. So it tells us at the same time how serious and how threatening emerging diseases can be, but also how well they can be controlled if we have the proper tools. Sorry for that. So emerging diseases, we also, this is a more recent one. This is the Newsweek front page of 2002, when the first SARS epidemic got an outbreak in humans. So it says, Newsweek had the title, The New Age of Epidemics. And Alejandro already mentioned that, but in that period, there was it traveled relatively swiftly around the world, although the SARS-1 or the COVID-1 virus is less infectious than the COVID-19 virus that we now all know, and it only affected about 8,000 people globally, with the resulting 770 mortalities. So it said in 2002, the world said, this is a new disease, this is a new virus. But now Newsweek, 20 years later, they have another front page just a couple of days ago, which says the doomsday variant. And this is about the second SARS coronavirus. So, in other words, emerging diseases are actually of all times. We see them now maybe a bit more frequently, but they are of all times. What I'm going to try to do is not focus on a whole list of where there are outbreaks and what exactly has been the outbreaks. What I'm going to try to focus on is a little bit to give you a bit of background on why could maybe emerging diseases be more frequently outbreaking currently. So what are the driving forces of these epidemics? There's definitely a number of reasons nowadays that play a role in these outbreaks. First of all, what increased, what had a major impact was actually the global trading patterns of the late 20th century, so-called major trading blocks, which were lifted, of which were changed, like with NAFTA agrees, Mercosur, the European Union, the ASEAN treaties that regulated major trade, so that trade, global trade, actually increased considerably. It's definitely also clear that certain diseases like BSE, like PRRS in swine, spread because of increased trade and increased spread of virus or infected materials. Climate change and global warming certainly also have an effect as a driving force of epidemics. If we look, for instance, to Europe, it is clear that with global warming, also certain vectors like mosquitoes or midges spread. If we look now and compare to a couple of decades ago, then it is clear that certain vectors expanded to the north because temperatures are increasing and they have the possibility to expand in areas that before were not really favorable for them. And that also led to some increase in vector-borne diseases like blue tongue, African horse sickness, Rift Valley fever. You could also think about dengue, who is spreading more, who's giving outbreaks from time to time in Italy. Also, disruption of new ecosystems. The human population is growing considerably, which that means that exposure to new pathogens because of the closeness of humans also with animal systems definitely also plays a role. And then you have to think on Hendra, which Alejandro already mentioned, but also Nipah. There's recent outbreaks of Marburg in Africa. So all of these forces play a role in driving the epidemics. Other ones are actually overpopulation and change in tropism of certain microorganisms, like the high pathogenic avian influenza, SARS, who jumped from animals into from the civet cat or from bats into humans. And what plays an enormous role, and I'll come back to that, is speed of transportation. While before it took quite a while to travel, it took quite some time. Nowadays, transportation of humans, but not only humans, but also of materials and animal products has extensively increased. So actually, it's a unique combination of all kinds of factors which all interact and which we don't really understand fully. So what we need to do is we need to shift our focus in studying these diseases and studying these epidemics and outbreaks, basically from economy a little bit to ecology. So if we look, for instance, to the global trade in exotic animals. Globally, there's about 4 million birds annually which are traded and which move from country or from continent to continent. More than 500,000 reptiles, around 50,000 primates. And that is the legal trade. But then there's an enormous illegal trade in live animals, also in meat products, with an estimate of about $4 to $6 billion annually in illegal trade. And this graph on the right side gives you a bit of an idea of the speed of global travel in relation to the world population. So if you look to the right bar, what it says is, on the left side, the number of days it took to navigate or to circumvent to travel the globe. And then we see that in 1850, it took you about a year to get around the world. While nowadays, it will take you less than 2 days. At the same time, in 1850, we were with a couple of billion people. So on the right side, the bar on the right side and the green line, we were with less than a billion, while nowadays we are around 7 billion people. So in other words, the number of people on the globe expanded tremendously, while at the same time, travel actually became very, very easy. And nowadays it can be stated that there's not 2 cities in the world that you cannot connect within 24 hours. And you should realize that with all of the flights together, maybe in Corona times it's slightly less, but still around, in average, there's around 500,000 people hanging in the air at any given moment. So, of course, this has a huge impact on the possible spread of infectious diseases. So let's look to a cruise ship. It's a great environment. Many people like it for their vacation. But in general, if you look to it from a microbiological point of view, it's a lot of elderly passengers. They frequent new environments. They go on to exotic places. Sometimes there's a lot of employees on such a cruise ship. Sometimes employees can be carriers. Sometimes you can end up with contaminated food and water. There's even cruise ships who offer medical care and dialysis for kidney diseases. So what happens, it's not only a great environment for the people, but it very often also results in foodborne diseases, norovirus, and then more recently, also coronavirus outbreaks. Last year, it was very clear that on many of these cruise ships, there were tremendous outbreaks because of the very close gathering of a number of people, passengers. So if you look to, let's say, the 7 billion people that we have, and these are numbers from Lonnie King from 2007, so they're certainly at the moment, they're certainly higher. But in 2007, over 21 billion food animals fed a population of 7 billion people, which results in trillions of pounds of product which are actually distributed all over the world. And then the projection was that in 2020, which is now already passed, that the demand for animal protein would increase by 50%, especially in developing countries. And if you look to these developing countries, then it is clear that 87% of the global population actually live in developing countries. And they are also growing the fastest. 90% of the population growth is in developing countries. So if you look to the more the more developed countries, they often have a negative people grow. If it wouldn't be for immigration, it would even be worse. But it's particularly in the developing world that population is growing. At the same time, there's also an increasing urbanization. In 2000, 47% of the world population was living in urban areas. And in 2030, it's expected that that number will have increased to 60% of the world population. Of course, all this concentration of people puts enormous pressure on systems and increases the risk for rapid spreading epidemics and infectious diseases. Water stress is another big problem. I don't think I need to tell Argentina I understood the recent problems of drying water-associated problems in the Paraná River. But because of this population growth, for the last 50 years of the 20th century, the availability of fresh water per person decreased by 60%. And that affects agriculture, that affects economics, that affect well-being and health, and that also results in less availability of fresh water, also results in an increased risk of infectious diseases. At the moment, about 6% of all deaths globally are associated to water. And around 1/3 of the world population still lacks access to adequate sanitation. And all of this plays a role. But water also brings, you could say, what the world's most dangerous animals. With the water and with flooding, nowadays also more and more the result of climate change, we see that there can be increases of mosquitoes, which can transmit malaria diseases, which can transmit outbreaks of Rift Valley fever, dengue. South America, and particularly Brazil, has experienced a couple of years ago serious Zika outbreaks. So also this is a factor, let's say, which has to be considered when talking about emerging diseases. And water also brings, and Alejandro already has talked to you about it, avian influenza. Avian influenza is particularly endemic in waterfowl. Waterfowl are actually the reservoir for avian influenza strains. And they will, together with pigs, the mixing vessel, they might generate new strains, which then eventually can also infect humans. So the FAO stated a couple of years ago that without a change in production practices in Southeast Asia, avian influenza, there would be no way you could eliminate avian influenza from the region. So if you just look to this picture, where you see the people sitting around, the chickens, the chickens on the ground, and a pig over here, you basically have all the elements to generate a pandemic threat of human influenza, the enemy at the gate, as it is called. So Lonnie King, in the past, a famous doctor in the US studying emerging diseases, launched the concept of the microbial Club Med. Of all new diseases, of all new emerging diseases, 75% of them are zoonotic. We look to, for instance, COVID-19, that is also a zoonotic disease, which is affecting animals and also affecting humans. Viruses of emerging diseases are actually the most common ones. And of all pathogens, around 60% are zoonotic. If we look to the total number of viruses, then there is actually very relatively low number of viruses, around 1,000 different ones, who are currently recognized, who are known. And 99% of all viruses still have to be discovered. So in other words, there's still a huge potential for zoonotic emerging diseases. And on top of that, in 2001, we also had like terrorism, bioterrorism coming into the picture. 2001, we had 9/11 in the US, but in the same period, slightly thereafter, we also had these anthrax terror attacks. And then there's a statement, just to give you a bit of an idea how these people look at infectious diseases and emergencies. There's a statement from the president of PETA, which is the People of Ethical Treatment of Animals in 2001, who said that if FMD would come to the US, it wouldn't be that bad because all of the animals are going to be killed anyway, but it would wake up consumers, and I hope FMD comes to the US. So this is the environment, let's say, where we actually currently live in. Alejandro also mentioned the 2001 FMD epidemic, which was due to the Open Asia strain. And the outbreak in the UK actually changed a little bit the opinion on how to look also at FMD control, because it was a bit of a wake-up call to many people. Up to then, the UK and also European countries always had as the rule, as a dogma, so to speak, if there was going to be an outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease, all of the animals were going to be slaughtered because eradication was the means of control. But the outbreak in 2001 really went out of control. And as Alejandro said, it resulted in about 4 million, close to 4 million animals who were slaughtered. In a total number of outbreaks, the total number of outbreaks was actually 2030, but nevertheless, there was about more than 7,000, 3 times or 4 times, almost 4 times as much premises animals were slaughtered, either because there were dangerous contacts or they were slaughtered on suspicion, but that resulted in a huge number of perfectly healthy, not infected, not affected animals who were slaughtered. There was a capacity problem in eradicating these animals. And so that resulted then in piles of cows who were, because there was no capacity to deal with the slaughter of so many animals, they were just burned, and that was broadcasted on television. And that created such a psychological trauma with society. It had a major impact on food consumption, but it also created such a trauma and such a message that people started to realize that eradication in case of an outbreak at this level was actually something that in the future would not be possible any longer or not be accepted any longer. So in the late summer of 2001, there was a lot of discussion on foot-and-mouth disease, on emerging diseases, on how to, where will the road take us, how are we going to deal with FMD in the future. So how should we prepare for the future, knowing all of this, knowing a bit of the background, knowing on our means of control, how should we actually deal with it? So the main questions, if we talk about emerging diseases, we are looking to the future. So the question, one of the main questions is, what will be next? Not easy to answer. We can predict, or we can at least think but emerging diseases can surprise us nevertheless. Another big question is, what can we handle? If we look, for instance, to, let's say, avian influenza, should we have an influenza strain that would become zoonotic and start to spread very quickly, we would probably also, like is the case now a bit also with the COVID outbreak, we would not have the capacity to manufacture sufficient vaccine, even if we would know how to make it. So how should we prepare, knowing all of this? So I won't be able to give you the perfect and easy answer, but I'm just going to launch a couple of ideas, what I think should be the best way of preparing and looking to emerging diseases. I think science, in all cases, should prevail over politics. Viruses don't know any border. They don't respect any border. Microbial diseases, microbial organisms don't do politics, they just spread. So control programs should be coordinated at the regional level, at the global level, depending on the topic. But it's not like it cannot be just a local situation, or a local control program. Nevertheless, the local situation and all stakeholders should, of course, be considered. They should be involved to get sufficient support of the program. So it's clear that generating a proper control program should be public and private, who have to pull together. They're not like opposite to each other, but there is a strong need to collaborate, to communicate with each other in order to be able to deal with these problems. We also shouldn't be, let's say, blind to existing situations, like, for instance, the challenge of the market chain, the trade in live animals, the trade in meat and meat products. It won't be, it will be either legal or illegal. It will have to continue. But we could, of course, discuss and determine upon the conditions under which it would be possible. For instance, trade of vaccinated animals compared to trade of non-vaccinated animals will, of course, have a different risk perspective. And as a scientist, I would say we should try to maximally make use of our capabilities, of available technologies like vaccines, like diagnostics, and also new technologies that could potentially improve. And in any case, if there are proper vaccines that exist, vaccination will continue to play a key role as an invaluable control tool in many of these diseases. There's a number of emerging diseases, like the African swine fever that Alejandro mentioned, where science didn't manage yet to make a proper vaccine. But a lot of the emerging diseases can be properly controlled, sometimes even eradicated, as I demonstrated with the rinderpest as an example. So control programs should be balanced using the latest insights, and if needed, they should also be able to be adapted. It's not like, it shouldn't be a rigid system where you have to follow the plan beyond all means, but if scientific insights change, if opinions change based on new information, it should be possible to adopt a plan to get the maximum control program. So globally and generally, monitoring, epidemiology, more attention to ecology should be paid. If we want to understand, let's say, emerging diseases, and if we want to have an idea on how to best deal with it, we should approach them by a so-called holistic approach, not looking to single subjects, but look to all of the possibilities, all of the elements. Possibilities of vaccination, possibility of diagnostics, managerial, biosecurity measures that can be taken, monitoring and evaluation, and the current situation. What Alejandro also mentioned, let's say, the current impact of COVID-19 on veterinary service systems and the damaging result of that, of course, is an element that shouldn't be neglected. You can design a perfect plan, but if reality says that you're not going to have the means to execute it, you should maybe adapt. And only then we will be able to obtain a sustainable control of infectious diseases as foot-and-mouth disease. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention. And if there's any questions, we will try to answer to our best. Thank you.